So I'm really going to talk about how some of the stuff that I've been working on about making using AI in the clinic in the hospital. Uh, and since we are a small crowd, we could have an open discussion. I don't have to wait till the end. I would really encourage you to interrupt me and ask questions. There are three papers that we published that I'm going to talk about, and the uh, the context of this work is that we're building a open source stack for machine learning in health. And if any of you are interested in that space, we would love to collaborate with you because it's in open source. It's open source collaboration, and it builds off this open source product called I2B2. I don't know if you've heard of I2B2. It's a platform developed at Harvard the last 10 years, and it's basically been focused on identifying patients for clinical trials. But our work over here is extending that platform to allow more analysis, to allow machine learning and stuff. Okay. So we'll try and advance this slide. It's on now. Okay, perfect. So we're going to talk. So I just have 5 slides, and there's a lot going on, and I spent a lot of time on them. So this is a heart failure study in which the goal of this work is to identify the subset of heart failure patients who are eligible for a particular kind of intervention. You take any, and this is not true just for heart failure, you take any domain in medicine, right? Take any particular problem. You can always stratify patients by maybe their risk or different kinds of intervention they are eligible for, right? So there's a group of patients, you could call them low hanging, who can immediately benefit. Medicine knows how to treat them, but they simply have not got that intervention, right? There's another group in which they're complicated, and you'll require some investigation to understand what's going on and so on, right? So there's a spectrum. So I think there is a strata of patients for every medical problem which can immediately benefit by administration of known therapy. And this is what we are doing in this study. And the challenge here is how to identify from the millions of patients in the hospital, in the health system records, how to identify those subset of patients who can immediately benefit. And instead of waiting for them to come to the hospital, can the hospital reach out to them, and intervene at home? That is what the background for this work is. So how do you identify this? How do you identify the patient? So I'm going to describe this phenotyping, workflow. Let's see if I can use the pointer. Okay, here it is. So you go to hospital population, you run an algorithm for identifying the patients, and then you make them available to the care coordinators or the navigators, and they're going to do deeper evaluation of those patients, just looking at the health record, and then they're going to reach out to the patient and ask them, do you want to have this intervention? And they're going to collect additional data which goes beyond the health record by talking to the patient, and then finally enroll them in the program for intervention. But you see, there is data generated here and there is data generated in the health record, and if you put it together, it's more meaningful. So you can see this, whatever you learn, you find gaps. By talking to the patient, you find gaps in the healthcare record. And then, okay, how can you tweak the algorithm to identify the patient in the first place? So this wheel keeps on turning around, and with every turn, you're able to identify the patients more accurately, right? And that's what's being shown in this graph. We had 4 turns over a period of 1 year, or let's say every 2 months there was a turn. So we begin with identifying 10,000 patients, and you would stratify them, and the navigators would look at the first 1,000 and find that, this is where your algorithm failed, and this is where you can do better. And we tried all these different approaches. So in this study, there were lots of variables which needed to be computed for the patients, but these 3 were the important ones. Like, did the patient have heart failure? what is the ejection fraction of the patient, and where was the cardiologist of this, where is the cardiologist of this patient, right? So even figuring out, is the cardiologist of this patient in our hospital, is a ML problem. It is not very apparent because patients have a complex journey. They see several people, and it's hard to identify out of all the people whom the patient is seeing, is this the treating cardiologist, right? So that was an ML problem of its own, and we tried different approaches. And you see over 4 turns, so the area in green shows those people who are actually eligible, and you could imagine that if you don't improve the algorithm, the green boxes are going to reduce in size. As the trial progresses, there's going to be more and more difficult to identify patients because your bucket is getting empty. But because we're improving the algorithm with every run, you're able to sustain the accrual for the trial. And I think trials have, so it's a study. So I would say the same thing stands for a trial, that if you're doing a trial or a study in which you want to identify patients, this kind of an approach, a dynamic approach in which you can improve the phenotyping of the machine learning algorithm dynamically is important. Okay, and so in our case, and this is a lot of people over here in this conference are about text data, and this is an example. So the ejection fraction is a measure of how well effectively the heart pumps the blood. Like it's a fraction of the blood which is leaving the heart when the heart contracts. And that variable was very important for our study, and this variable is not structured. So we had to spend a whole lot of resources to identify and develop an algorithm for this. And you'll find the papers here. You'll find the papers at the bottom. This is the paper which details exactly how the algorithm was developed. So I think a lot of the people working on NLP would find this helpful, that this is a real world problem and how did we go ahead, and usually it was a regular expressions which worked out, but what is the method to developing those regular expressions and how this was solved. Okay, and I think this work talks about a methodology to overcome the need for manual curation of data. So one of the biggest challenges in machine learning in healthcare is that machine learning requires gold standard. It requires a lot of annotations. And who's going to do the annotation? The experts. But the experts are so expensive. Right? They are busy, in the clinic. It's very expensive to have those experts. So then what to do? Are there alternative approaches? So I think those you could have. So for supervised machine learning, you require annotations. For unsupervised, you don't. But then you don't know what you get out of unsupervised methods. So is there a space in between called as weakly supervised? And I'll describe what is meant by weakly supervised. So this is a weakly supervised machine learning algorithm for identifying, and I'll describe how this really works. So if you look at the health record, and if you try to identify patients who have diabetes, for example, right, out of 1 million patients, maybe you might find 20,000 of them do have diabetes. The number will be much bigger. X number do have diabetes. But when you actually look at the record, you'll find that though diabetes is mentioned in the health record, they don't really have diabetes. They're coded for it, they're charged for it, but they don't. Now, how does that happen? That's because even if you're suspected of having diabetes, then a test is done, the glucose tolerance test or some other test is done for the clinician to diagnose whether you have diabetes or not. So even though you didn't have, the test turns out that says that you don't have, but the code diagnosis gets stacked to your record, right? Now the logic we are using here. So how do you differentiate? If who really has diabetes and who doesn't have diagnosis, who doesn't really have diabetes. So we're suggesting a very simple method here. We're saying that you count. Just don't see whether the word diagnosis, that you count how many times it occurs. So if you really count, and this kind of graph shows like what happens if you count. So you will find that you'll find this distribution. There's a certain number of patients who really have a lot of, where the counts are really high, and it tapers down. So the more the number of times you have a particular code, the more likely you are truly suffer from the disease, because you're getting continuous care for that. Okay, you're coming to the clinic and you're getting cared for that. So it's more likely that you have died. So if you take that simple approach, so now let's say you partition the patients into two groups: those who have diabetes mentioned 100 times and those who don't have diabetes mentioned in their group, right? And you ignore the ones in between. You look at the poles, right? So you'll find that the ones at the poles are truly accurate, patients who have now. So now you've found a method of identifying diabetic patients who are going to be served as gold standard. Now you don't have to tell a clinician, can you tell me who is diabetic, by looking at the record for sure, right? So just by taking this approach, you take your data set, focus on the poles, and you train on the poles, and then you apply it to the test set. We found that we were able to build ML algorithms for a whole lot of clinical conditions. So initially, without this work, you would require to hire, or contract, or ask clinicians to do that, and you spend a lot of energy on building the gold standard. So this is a method of, it can really help build ML models fast in the clinic. Okay, I want to take a step back and talk about healthcare data in general, clinical data in general. And you must have heard lately you must have heard a lot of, there are a lot of formats, a lot of standardization of data. And it's important to have the standards so that you can have interoperability, and you can, whatever you build at one system works on another healthcare system. But sometimes it can get in the way, right? Because you really have to focus a lot on where and how, and organizing the data and collating the data is a big challenge in the field of medicine. And those who work with health data can identify with this, right? So we said, forget about the standards for a while. Just look at, in this piece of work, and can you think of data as just two boxes? One is the actual data, and second one is the metadata. Forget about the standards and everything at the moment. And have the simple thinking and see if that helps your ML teams do analysis better. You're going to take a step forward. And so we define data as who, when, and what, right? So there are just 4 columns in this data table: medical record number, timestamp, code, and value. And what this code is, you explain in this metadata table. So GLU is nothing but a blood glucose. It's a blood test. It's a blood glucose. It's a lab done on the blood, and it's an integer. So if you can convert all your data in these 2 tables, it's very easy for your clinical team to understand and come and contribute, and your data team to build models to do machine learning, right? And you can see this table easily pivots to form machine learning features, right? If you don't do this, your tables, that data is scattered everywhere, and you have to spend a lot of time on doing joins and making them in the right way to finally build the model, right? So this is the thing. So we've taken I2B2, and we've built, a lot of work has gone into building this ETL pipeline, which you can simply convert your institution's data in these 2 formats. And there's I2B2 is a platform which will understand this data, and you can ingest it into I2B2 and then query. You can query. So it has got an interface by which even non-IT experts can come and do basic summary analysis, right? And this module is what helps you convert your institution's data into this simplistic format. Yeah, I want to spend a little bit more time on this one. And this is a building block. So once you have data in this format, you can do, as I said, machine learning in an easy way. And then it is possible to collaborate with others. And you don't spend time in different, in different data interchange formats and so on. So I want to stop here and see if there are any more questions. I could elaborate on something. But this is an important direction for us, and we've spent so recognizing that extraction, transform, and load is not a solved problem, and we spend a lot of energy in our data science workflow to just obtain data, even within the institution, even when we have with governance and everything, we have data in place. Just getting the data to move, because they are huge volumes. The tooling is needed, and it's not a solved problem. What is happening right now is, instead of developing a tool, people are throwing the problem at an engineer, and the engineer, So I think there is a lot of things data scientists do in our field right now, which they needn't have to do if the tools are there, and and the industry or the academy has to build tooling so that a data scientist can actually do something more productive, right? And if you talk to data scientists, they'll say, okay, 80%, 90% of the work is organizing and cataloging data, and the 10% comes later. So can we do some tooling to help that can really help the data scientists to be productive? So this is a tool I would encourage you to look at this paper, and and feel free to reach out.